And let's now take a look at, I would like to just take a look at the last one, the student voice or the student's voice. And here, when we talk about service learning, because the students will choose the topic, will choose the issue, because the students will have to work with their classmates, right? Because the students will have to do the data gathering. They will probably suggest to the teacher, even if, let us say, there's a certain technique recommended by the teacher, that there could be certain modification of the technique. Then therefore, we prevent or we lessen boredom on the part of the students. So what are we trying to say here? We are saying that when we talk about service learning, we are emphasizing the fact that this is clearly engaging and motivating for the students. Especially, especially when we talk about the perspective of the high school students. Because again, for the adolescent, when can I be done and get on with real life? This is the attitude. I am inquisitive. I would like to develop my thinking, critical thinking, creative thinking. I would like to collaborate with my group mates. And particularly because what they have found out about just interested in what they can do for their community. Particularly because right now they are faced with, we also are faced with many problems like climate change, etc. When I can be done with just theoretical studies, right? And get on with real life. Especially because when we say get on with the real life, this is now an opportunity for me to exchange ideas with people in the real world, to learn ideas from people in the real world. Because we all know that when we talk about motivation, and we do invest in service learning, and when we talk about motivation, motivation is the driver of student participation. In fact, it's the driver of student attention. Because before they can even participate, before they can even probably write, read, participate, you need to catch their attention. And the driver of attention, participation, okay, uh, activeness, active participation on the part of the students is none other than motivation, engagement, because they know that they're able to contribute something while working with their group mates, with their classmates. I would like now to pose two questions before we leave the first part of the module. And these questions are, what is service learning? And a more important question is it worth it? Remember the invitation, pedagogical creativity. If service learning is not yet a part of my repertoire, of teaching methods and strategies, then take a look at the possibility or in my classes in the next few months, okay, even if we are online. All right, so again, I passed us 1 minute. Let's now take a look at the second part. We will now shift to the next part. And I would like to everyone to think again, to reflect, and probably recall the last Catalyst Character Education webinar or seminar prior to the pandemic that you have attended. Because here, we are now going to make an argument, a connection, that when you use service learning, that you don't only address what is is needed by the children, by the students' growth and development in values and virtues, or character education, or character development. And just like what I said initially, when we were taking a look at the objectives, this is probably the most important part of the module. Because also in this particular part, we'll take a look at some strategies embedded in the explanation. All right. What is the connection between service learning and character education or character development? Okay, so again, an invitation for everyone. What is the first word or probably the first phrase, first sentence that comes to mind when you think or when you try to make a connection between service learning and character education? So what is the connection between service learning and character education? I was trying to scan the chat box a while ago and it took note of a question regarding service learning and performance assessment, service learning and authentic assessment. Is there a connection between the two? Is it possible to consider service learning not only as an instructional method, a model of the curriculum, but also a performance assessment model? Or more important than performance assessment only, as an authentic assessment model? Because definitely the students will apply what they have learned in the classroom in the real world, and even apply what they have learned in the real world in the classroom, vice versa. I must say yes. And I must apologize because I did not propose a third point about service learning, that it is not only an instructional model, a pedagogical model, a model of the curriculum in terms of the content, right? But number three, definitely it is a performance assessment model. Okay, and more than the performance assessment is authentic assessment model. And therefore, when you take a look at the word authentic assessment model, the real world, okay, number one, definitely assessment for learning is very much inherently a part of the model. Feedback coming from the teacher in order for the students to learn. Feedback coming from the community in order for the students to learn from the community. Feedback coming from their own peers. And we all know, based on the meta-analysis on research findings regarding teaching methods and strategies, feedback is one of the impactful strategies. It has an impact greater than zero point 0.5 in terms of meta-analysis. And when you say more than zero point 0.5, that's basically a year potentially a year worth of achievement, a school year of achievement. Because the students, they learn from feedback. And when that feedback has something to do with what they are doing, meaningful for them, when that particular feedback comes at the right time, then definitely they can make an adjustment in their performance, in their tasks. Because without feedback, they will not be able to somehow infer whether what they are doing, whether they are on the right track or not. Whether you're talking about reading, talking about writing, we're talking about presenting, we're talking about calculating, the feedback is important, especially feedback coming from the teacher. And we also know that sometimes that the feedback of the teacher is indirect because the teacher will ask questions. But those questions are clarificatory questions that would allow the students to rethink, to take a deeper dive into what they're doing. So definitely performance assessment. All right. So what is the connection between SL, service learning, and character education? We begin where it matters most. And these are student views about service learning. 1, 2, 3. Take a look at number 3. Students say, I have a sense of pride. Where does that pride come from? Because I was able to work with a classmate of mine whom is not really a friend. I was able to see him as a person. I was able to go beyond my limited definition of friendship. Right? That even if he is different from me, he is a friend. Number two, I have a sense of pride because we were able to make an impact in the community. We were able to raise funding in order to supplement the, the limited funds of the barangay library. We're able to donate 1,000 pesos. And the 1,000 pesos came from the class coming up with an activity, selling certain t-shirts, probably certain mugs, and then the funds were donated to that particular library. And you take a look at number one, you take a look at number two. And these are the views of students about service learning. They are excited, they have a sense of accomplishment and sense of pride. And this is important because when you take a look at service learning and character education, you normally use a character education strategy within service learning called student spotlight. Student spotlight. Again, intentional learning activity. The teacher comes into the picture. Okay, class. Okay, before you break up into groups, we are now going to use an activity called spotlight without the word student. Okay, we will focus on certain members of the group. And we are going to ask them, number one, what have you contributed? What have I contributed in a group setting? But more importantly, let us ask the members of the group, right? What do you appreciate about his contributions? I am excited because I am going to tell my group mates about what I have contributed. I am excited because I'm going to hear from them their assessment, probably their evaluation of my contribution. A sense of pride, a sense of accomplishment. And you're using a character education strategy within service learning. And it is important really to be able to imbibe, to be able to develop in the students a certain sense of pride that they have to be proud of what they're doing. Especially because remember, it's aligned with the curriculum, it's a service to the community, therefore it's a good activity. Something good comes out of it. So here, we already have a hint regarding the connection between service learning and character education. Because character education activities can clearly be embedded or be a part of service learning. Okay? But it's just the first argument. We will take a look at other arguments. So what about your own students? Are you willing to try it? Service learning, instructional methodology, performance assessment, and then infuse, embed, integrate character education activities. Does it make sense? Will it work? Based on experience? I think it will. I am convinced it will. So what about your own students? Let's take a look at service learning and character education. And I would like us to go back again to the connection between the two. And here, we'll take a look at evidences coming from research. Evidence-informed education, evidence-informed education, evidence-based education. Of course, there's a difference between the two. Evidence-based education based on what you see in the research literature. But we all know that when we talk about evidence-based, our contexts are different. I may be teaching, for example, in a rural school, and majority of the findings are basically about urban students. Perhaps there was a good effect of that particular teaching method based on the research findings because it was implemented very well. And when we say implemented very well, they have all the materials, but I cannot do that in my own setting, in my own context, because I lack the materials. That's why probably a better word is we learn from the literature, from evidence-based education, but evidence-informed teaching, evidence-informed education. Because we are informed by the evidence, but we are not divorced from reality because we have to understand our own resource materials, our own setting, perhaps our own limitations, and more importantly, our own students. Ano ba yung grade level nila? What is the subject that I'm teaching? What kind of community are we in the case of service learning, etc. All right? So where is the evidence regarding the connection between the two? And here, you will be surprised. Okay? So I'm going to give a break in 5 minutes. You will be surprised because the research literature gives us a clear indication that service learning helps academic improvement. I have highlighted it there, especially in the development of higher order thinking. Especially in the development of higher order thinking. And you have there examples, for example, gains in math, particularly measurement and problem solving, and science, very specific, prediction and knowledge of botany, right? So here, we already have the first evidence. Okay. But what about character education? Because service learning improves academic performance. But what about character education? And you will be surprised because service learning is one of the best, what works best, one of the best teaching strategies, one of the best performance assessment models, okay, borrowing from one of the participants. Service learning has an effect size of 0.58. Anything above zero point 0.4 has a potential. Remember potential. Remember evidence-based education. Evidence-based teaching is different from evidence-informed teaching. What matters most is the evidence-informed teaching because it's the way you implement it. Cognizant of your own context, limitations, challenges, the kinds of students that you have, the subject that you're handling, etc. Okay? And service learning has a year equivalent, equates to over a year of growth and development of the students in learning. And the learning here is comprehensive. It includes not only academic, but social learning, emotional learning. And we all know that especially in the US, when they talk about social and emotional learning, it's character development, it's character education. So in this 2020 book, okay, the authors look at service learning and they said service learning is all about acting in an ethical, democratic, and socially effective and productive ways. Isn't that character education? So for the authors, service learning is character education. It's actually a model of character education for them. And they borrowed this particular effect size, I think, from the studies of John Hattie. It has an effect size that is over a year of growth in learning. And that particular learning is not limited to academics. And here, they also emphasize certain points and also from other research materials and based on my experience about what are the success factors in order for service learning to be effective. And I came up with 5. Of course, we have to talk about the importance of the teacher, that the teacher implements the program with fidelity. Ano ba yung fidelity? Di ba? Yung meaningful, partnership with the community, structured, okay, intentional learning, student voice, student choice, of course, adequate training. We all know that. We also have to evaluate the impact, okay, partnership with the community, and then take a look at the last one, the importance of leadership, the importance of not only the principal, but also the importance of teachers working together, teacher leaders, teacher leadership, a professional learning community. Because without it, meaning to say, it will become more successful, or it has the potential to become more successful in terms of being implemented properly, effectively, and even efficiently, because the school is supporting it, because the school is doing it, a school unit perhaps, or better, the entire school. So it's worth a try. It's worth a try. I think it's worth a try. What I did now was to reconfigure the presentation. I did skip some slides, and I will no longer also discuss the high school portion of the of this particular presentation regarding the connection between service learning and character education, in order for us perhaps to be able to go into the third part of the module, which is how do I do service learning while we are in the midst of the pandemic, while we are using online and distance learning? Because I think that's also very important, right? So we will skip, I have skipped certain slides or many slides of this particular part of the module. Now, let us try to refresh what we have discussed a while ago, particularly the second objective or the second goal. That when we talk about service learning, this particular methodology, this particular instructional methodology, pedagogical method, performance assessment model, or authentic assessment model, do make a difference in the academic learning of the students, and not only academic learning, but also in the character formation of the students, as you have clearly seen in the meta-analysis of research or research meta-analysis. It's 0.58. Yeah, we will now go where the rubber meets the road to be able to demonstrate how students are able to develop themselves, form their character, or teachers are provided with an opportunity to form and develop the character of their own students when they use service learning. So let us go back again to the PC model, service learning model of Project Citizen. Concise. Identify a community problem. Choose a community problem. Focus on a community problem. Example, where do we build the pedestrian lane so that people who are traveling, who are walking, who are crossing the street will be safe in doing so? So the students now will do research, and aside from doing research, interview, okay, conduct a survey, probably observe a foot traffic, etc. They will also organize and interpret the information. And remember, we said a while ago, it has to be intentional. The students are not left on their own, meaning to say the teacher will have to wear the hat of a coach, will have to give feedback, will have to introduce certain techniques, certain methods within service learning, so that the students will be intentional when they gather information, when they interpret the data, when they present, etc. They will come up with a policy solution, and more than a plan, more than writing the plan, they will present the plan to people who can do something about the issue, about the challenge in the community. All right? And then they reflect. And the reflection is not only done at the tail end. There are also initial periods, initial sessions when the students will reflect. So let us consider this particular example, something to do with the pedestrian lane. And what we're trying to point out also is the fact that when you do service learning, whether the PC model, the Habitat for Humanity, the We Schools model, etc., it can be applied across the curriculum. Service learning across the curriculum. English, math, science, of course, social studies. And here, we have to now highlight because we're now going to the level of the classroom, in fact, to the level of the individual student, in order to demonstrate the impact of service learning, right? Not only on academic performance, but on the character development of the children, the character formation. It's a development of virtues. And we all know that based on research, again, there is a connection between virtues and academic performance. You take a look at number one, then of course there number two, especially number two, character strengths such as the virtues of love, gratitude, hope, perspective taking, empathy, perseverance, patience are related to high grade point averages. A student who does well in academic content has the potential as a student has the potential to do well in academic content in getting good grades because he has developed certain virtues, certain character strengths. So here, so for example, another way of looking at it is that in service learning, we can introduce another character education strategy. And experts call it the brave space. And what does that mean? Today, class, okay, we will now take a look at the next phase of your service learning project. We will now go into the community and we will have to interview people. I have already approved your interview guide, okay? So this particular activity now will try to give us the confidence to be able to go out into that community and to be able to contribute to the improvement of the people in that community. And before we do that, let us have this particular session with the group. It's called Brave Space. For example, today, what are your concerns in going to the community, in interviewing people, in talking to them? Are you comfortable using their language? For example, because you're dealing with private school students who have difficulty speaking in Filipino. Do you have difficulty? Do you see a difficulty in terms of talking to people who are older than you? Today, class, what are your concerns? Today, children, today, the group one, what are your concerns? And how do you intend to face those challenges? How do you intend to face those challenges? The brave space. It's an opportunity for the students to reflect on what they will do in that particular community to be able to develop a virtue probably of perseverance, a virtue of courage, probably the virtue of hope, that something good will come out of it, even if, for example, I have a difficulty speaking the language, Filipino, kasi Inglesero ako, for example, right? So now, going back to that pedestrian lane, we can easily see, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? We choose the project. We choose the topic. There's a buy-in right away. And therefore, you're developing the skill, okay, an executive function of self-regulation. I own this program. I own this topic. I own the content. The teacher listened to us, right? Number two, okay, take a look at the last one. What we have chosen will contribute to the good of the people, especially those people who are crossing that dangerous part of the street. You develop love, a character strength of love. You take a look at number three, the middle one. They work with their peers, or probably they work with the members, some members of the community, even probably online. Of course, with teacher supervision, attachment, probably respect. And despite the fact that these people live in poverty, and for example, I live in, I don't know, Ayala, Alabang, we have something in common. We have the same aspirations. We have the same dreams. We have the same struggle. They're no different from us. It's a we. It becomes a we. All right. So service learning has the potential to complete the student. It's not only academic learning, it's also character education. And that's very important. And what I did now was to ask a friend who is a service learning researcher practitioner, actually an expert, of course, but she won't probably call her, well, she will probably complain when I call her an expert, to ask her about what are those character strengths and virtues that you have seen throughout the years that you have implemented service learning in the grade school. She also did an extensive research about service learning, particularly focusing on the self-efficacy of teachers. And she is very passionate not only about service learning, but service learning as character education. And she said, there is a high school part. It's like what I said, we will no longer take a look at the high school. And she said, in my years of experience in using service learning, I think the following character strengths are developed the most when you take a look at the grade school students. Number one, they serve others. They learn to do work for other people, not only for their family, not only for their friends, not only for their classmates, or even probably schoolmates. Although if you go beyond the class, that's already a good move on your part. Service. They learn to be more responsible, accountability, especially because it's a high stakes environment, high stakes, not because they're taking a standardized test and the test results will determine whether they will go to the next grade level. It's a high stakes test in a way because what is at stake here is the impact on the people who live in that community. Number three, respect. A due regard for another person. So these are the things that she mentioned. And what I did was to take a look at we will explore these three items: responsibility, accountability, respect, and service or serve others. We will explore and take a deep dive into those three. And our initial deep dive into the topic or topics or the character strengths is to take a look at what the experts are saying. Is this based on research? Yung responsibility, yung accountability, o yung respect, o yung serving others? And based on what I have seen, it is something that need to be developed in the grade school, particularly service, and particularly respect, particularly service, and particularly respect. So coming from an expert, one of the experts in social studies education, or rather elementary education. So here, you have here what we call, okay, there is a need regarding inculcating among the children. We have to stress the importance of respect for others. And we have to emphasize the need to contribute one's best effort to serve for the common good in a group project. And again, we have to imagine service learning again. Take a look at these examples. Grade 4 student learns, okay, or a grade 4 group of students, they learn how to design an ebook for grade 1 students online kasi. Okay. Grade 5 students, they participate in an online fundraising program for prisoners because they cannot go out of the school. Or perhaps if you say that, can we do service learning within the school? We can probably take away community partnership. Perhaps I'm not yet confident to try it. Maybe next year, sir, or next semester. Okay, grade 6 student or group of students, they realize the struggles of fellow students in Afghanistan, particularly with the return to power of the Taliban, wherein girls, again, are forbidden to enter the schools, to study, to be educated. All right. So imagine service learning again, responsibility. And responsibility has something to do with care, to nurture that others for others out of kindness, out of love. All right. And here, if you take a look at a grade 4 student learns how to design an ebook for grade 1 students, isn't that doing good for others with love and kindness? Because anyway, they have chosen the project. There's ownership of the project. And they say that, okay, we belong to a school system. Okay, our school system here in Manila took note of the fact that one of the schools that belong to the system in Pampanga, they need books, storybooks. And our service learning project, because of the pandemic, because it is online, is to come up with an ebook for them. This is our contribution for them. Okay. They realize also it is important to help everyone. He is not a family member. They're not family members. They're not friends. I don't know them personally, but I'm willing to help because they need that help. And I can provide that help. Okay, so imagine, okay, everything is aligned with the curriculum. There is a partnership between your school and that particular school in Pampanga. You are in contact with the teacher or teachers in the grade 1 classes. It is intentional, okay? But aside from those things, it goes beyond academics. Because I think we need to emphasize the point that was mentioned in the meta-analysis that service learning is indeed character education. The way service learning was defined as a method. Right? Okay, let's take a look at partnership, respect, and friendship. So it's an interpersonal relationship that promotes the growth of the person, of the individual, intra. Okay? But take a look at what the research is telling us. When students develop respect, when students, they have friends, they develop friendship with people, take a look at the second point. The research is clear that children without friends or with few friends are at risk. Mas malaki ang chance for academic failure, emotional stress. So especially nowadays, especially when you encounter webinar titles like trauma-informed teaching strategies, taking care of the mental health of our students, for example, okay, and psychological disorders. Okay, the research is clear that children without friends are at risk. Therefore, you see that when service learning comes into the picture, it's not only about academics, no matter how important academics is, no matter how important the cognitive development is, but character education is as important. And definitely, when you develop a character strength, it has an impact on academics. All right. Example number 2, respect. A grade 6 student realizes the struggle of a fellow student in Afghanistan. We talk about globalization. We talk about understanding people from another culture. We talk about empathy, perspective taking. Therefore, it creates a positive emotion. All right. Because respect is about a positive emotion, a positive regard for someone. Let's take a look at the third one, service, serve others. Perhaps you can talk about servant leadership. Okay. Now, service learning gives us another perspective of the student, wherein the student is no longer a problem, right? But he becomes a resource. Why is that so? Especially because when you talk about service learning, you talk about motivation, you talk about engagement, you talk about you talk about ownership, right? And the student comes into the table bringing with him can utilize in order for the group to be able to contribute to the community. Whether that community is a community in another school or in a barangay, okay? It enhances learning and leadership, primarily because it is active. They learn from experience, they learn by doing, they learn by trial and error. They also learn from the error. They learn from the feedback coming from the teacher. They learn from the community. And more importantly, also, the community learns from them because it's a two-way process. It's hands-on. And let's take a look at the third example. A grade 5 student or a group of students, they participate in a fundraising program for prisoners. What do they learn? It changes their perceptions, okay, of other people. So it's the other way around also, okay? They see the prisoners, people who are different from them, okay, not only as problem, but people in need of help, right? So are there other character traits? There are other character traits. But the point here is, again, in service learning, particularly because we're looking at the connection between service learning and character education, the other point is there is no bystander here. They are all character champions. They they struggle to become better persons. They, in a way, in their own little way, they model how to become how to become a better person, right? So I will skip this particular part regarding the high school. And here I also identified certain values and virtues and certain example strategies. So for example, it's important here they develop empathy, pro-social behavior, and a character education strategy is check in, check out. All right, so we have done a tour of the community. We have talked to people in the community, right? So let's now try to assess what we have done. Let's have a check-in and check-out activity. How are you today? Then the student will speak about how we see today. But more importantly, how can the team help you, especially if you have certain struggles or problems or issues? Okay? So it provides an opportunity to connect with the peers. All right. So let's move on and take a look at, we'll skip this one, and take a look at the last part. I would like to spend, okay, 15 minutes with the last part. And here, what are the effective classroom level strategies, particularly because we are in a pandemic, particularly because we are doing online teaching and learning. And let us take a look at, okay, so again, what is the first word that comes to mind when you think of effective classroom level online service learning strategies? Okay, again, the fastest 1 minute. Let's move on. Now, I would like to encourage the teachers that the best way to come up with good classroom strategies, with a good program perhaps on doing service learning online, is to talk, to have a dialogue with fellow faculty members. especially in the context of a community of learners, and the learners are the teachers. So when you go back to your own school in your own context, think about implementing service learning, but service learning not only program, okay, subject area, not only, for example, in my grade level, but perhaps we can do it, okay, in the entire grade level, the entire school unit, or even the entire school. Because remember, success factors, one of those success factors is culture, the importance of support coming from the principal, coming from the administration, coming from the people who are taking care of you, right? And especially your colleagues, your fellow teachers. So two important points before we take a look at the classroom level strategies here. The important points are number one, even in a post-COVID-19 classroom, when we are given the chance, for example, to do, I don't know, high-plex learning, you're teaching online and some students are inside the classroom, rather you're teaching inside the classroom and probably some students are online, or it can be flipped learning. You will give the students video to view, to study 1 hour before the class, and then when you go online, okay, you engage the class about what they have learned from the video, or probably even going back to full-time face-to-face classes. So these things can be applied in the post-COVID-19 classroom. Although since we are in a pandemic, we are going to focus on doing service learning online. And here are the general principles based on my reflection in doing service learning online before we take a look at the classroom level strategies. Number one is there has to be a good relationship, good rapport between you and your students. Remember, they talk about a kind of teaching that is a very effective type of teaching. It's called relational teaching. Okay, how is my relationship with my students? Though they see me as someone who is authoritative rather than authoritarian, do they see me as someone not only as a teacher, but someone whom they could confide certain issues, problems that they're facing, even probably outside of academics? Number two, it's important to check on the students on a regular basis, whether an email or probably a Viber message. And check on the students means you're also available, of course, certain period of time, for example, from 8 to 5 in the afternoon, 8 to 6 in the evening. The third one is we have to be inclusive. Everyone must succeed in the class. And I mean everyone. You must have some sort of a universal design for your classroom, short of differentiating it. Number four, you have to be flexible, especially regarding the internet connection, especially, for example, regarding contact with the community, etc. And here, you have to take note of the fact that in the context of online teaching and learning, we're not only looking at the content, but rather character education, as always the case. But I think in this particular setting, okay, it's really important to make sure that we emphasize resilience among our students. So what are your classroom level strategy recommendations? Let's now take a look at some of them. Okay, so we'll skip that particular part. We will explore the research findings. I'll give you practical strategies based on my own experience. And we will take a look at words of wisdom coming from character education experts, particularly those experts who have given seminars for Catalyst. And maybe you have attended some of them. So who are these experts? Michelle Borba, Hal Orban, Tom Licona, and Harry Wong. All right. So our framework is service learning is meaningful learning. Okay. Active student participation. They cooperate because it's a collaborative group work. It's authentic because they deal with people in the community. Remember the intentional, and the teacher plays a very critical role Okay? It's constructive in a positive sense because they're able to make an impact in the community. They're able to learn from the community, not only from the content, from the curriculum, from their peers or from the teacher, right? So let's take a look at the first one. The first one is meaningful. And here, service learning is meaningful because the projects, the activities, the impact, the results of the projects and the activities will basically and hopefully outlive the stay of the student, for example, in that particular grade level or in the entire grade school unit. Let us say we did this particular service learning activity when I was in grade 4. But looking at that particular community, our legacy, quote unquote, our impact can still be seen, can still be felt. So it's transcendence. They become a part of something bigger than themselves. All right, meaningful. And if we take a look at what Michelle Borba is trying to tell us, this is precisely what students need. They are in need of activities that will engage them, that will motivate them, because these activities are meaningful to them. Meaningful to them. They have the opportunity to be creative, remember? Right? We will choose the topic. Okay? We will gather information. We will talk to people. We will make sense of the data. We will interpret the data. This is being creative. And more important than being creative is that they become a part of something, a purpose bigger than themselves, right? So I would like now to give these particular strategies to make service learning meaningful in the context of online teaching and learning. Number one, important, of course, that you have to take a look at their own safety, even doing the project online. There has to be a vetting, for example, of the community partner. There has to be contact with, for example, I don't know, the barangay captain or the principal of another school, because remember, they'll be talking to people. They'll be conversing with people, right? So so a a very important consideration is the fact that we have to take care of their safety, especially when they go in the real world, especially when this pandemic is over. The second point is a general one. The second point is it becomes meaningful if they see that the teacher is involved in the project or projects. Because remember, they will have different service learning projects because it's a choice. And one thing that puts off a student is when they are on their own. It becomes meaningful not only because of the purpose, but because of the fact that we know that the teacher is with us. The teacher provides opportunities for us to talk to one another. Intentional provides us with techniques, with methods, coaches us, probably even mentors us individually. A third strategy is you have to also make sure that they know how to use technology, the confidence in using technology. You have to teach them how to use certain apps that they can use. I don't know, maybe if you're talking about it, let's say high school students, perhaps when they do data gathering and when they try to interpret the data, perhaps they can use an app wherein there's a word cloud, word cloud. How do you use that word cloud? Or how do you use, for example, a certain application wherein it will help you organize the data. Okay. So connected to that is they have to have access to the information. It becomes meaningful because they're not on their own. When they do a partnership with the community, especially when they access the community, of course using ICT, okay, you are there, you guide them. Not necessarily telling them everything what they need to do, but rather providing them with suggestions, recommendations, with support. All right. Now let's take a look at the second one. And the second one has something to do with the curriculum. So, well, we know that the curriculum has different meanings. It can be the curriculum document, it can be a lesson plan, it can be, for example, certain artifacts that you use, okay, or even, for example, the instructional activities. But here, I think it is important that we listen to Harry Wong. I don't know if it was 2015 or 2016 when Mr. Rintoy brought Harry, or maybe even earlier when Mr. Rintoy brought Harry Wong to the Philippines. And somehow we know Harry Wong, we equate Harry Wong with classroom management. But actually, he also has a lot of good points besides classroom management. And he said, when you do planning, when you plan your lesson plan, whether it's a daily lesson plan or you to the goal or standard, we call that curriculum fidelity. And then you have to know how to deliver the instruction, the teaching method, because for him, the curriculum is also a teaching method. And here, the points that I would like to make here are basically four strategies. The first one is in a service learning project, especially because you're looking at it as an assessment, authentic assessment task, you have to have rubrics and checklists. And those rubrics and checklists must be communicated, must be explained to the students. And therefore, they are available in the learning management system. They could easily be accessed by the students. In fact, it is a good idea, especially in the high school, to invite the students that a certain portion of the rubric or checklist will be co-constructed, will be co-created. The second point is maximize the use of the discussion boards because classroom discussion in a synchronous model, in a synchronous format is very limited. And therefore, in certain LMS, for example, if you're using Canvas or Brightspace, or I'm not quite sure about the Google Classroom, but there's an opportunity for the students to exchange notes using the discussion board because it takes the place of classroom discussion. What I said, right? It's very limited. Again, the intentional a script provide an opportunity, provide a technique or a method for the students to talk to one another about their projects, about their learning. An opportunity for them to be able to discuss because your class, when they do service learning project, is a community of learners. Now, the students will engage, will motivate, just like what we said a while ago, because it's a real world problem. And that's a given to choose a real world problem. And the fourth one is actually what we call probably the most important one here. It's important to provide adequate, the keyword is adequate feedback. And the adequate feedback is feedback that is timely when they needed it the most. Feedback that is targeted, right? So time, when, okay, what and why, targeted. It is something that I need in order for me to be able to, I don't know, maybe come up with a good interpretation of the data or come up with an interview guide that will work in the context of this particular barangay. So it's important that the teacher is intentional. And one way of being intentional, because it is an intentional learning opportunity, is to provide that feedback.